Welcome everyone to another episode of Early Days, where entrepreneurship meets storytelling, proudly presented by our friends at Prowse Chowne. Get ready to be inspired by individuals at the forefront of business, and this is a fascinating business, Caplink Financial Corporation. Brian Menges, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Are you born and raised Edmontonian?
Born in Edmonton, raised in Calgary, and spent a few years in California, so kind of smushed around.
How long you been back home?
Oh, I came up here to go to university and met my wife and didn't leave, so I've been here for 30 years plus.
Explain the business. What is Caplink Financial Corporation?
Initially, we were a private mortgage lender, and we've operated in Canada for 27 years. But around 2020, I started looking for new markets, and that took us into the United States and then Mexico. So we're a private mortgage lender, so we take investors' capital, we put it out in mortgages with the intent on getting a return for them. But we needed to find new markets because we felt the Canadian market was a bit overwhelmed with supplies of money, and people were starting to reach for harder deals. And where we ended up was in a marketplace where we're alone. We have no competition. What we do in Mexico for sure, and very little in the United States.
What got you personally into the mortgage and real estate fields?
Well, actually, when I started in mortgage, I couldn't spell the word mortgage, but I graduated from the U of A and was very active in a fraternity and sat on many advisory boards. And when I graduated, an alumni approached me and asked me to come work for his mortgage company, and that started it, and I've never looked back.
So what made you want to start with Caplink? Was it just a matter of striking out on your own, or what was it?
Well, initially, when I was with the alumni, we were doing bank-related financing. We had life insurance companies that were sponsoring us. I didn't enjoy that. I liked the private lending where we make our own decisions and live with those decisions. So I started Caplink with another gentleman, Kelly Simpson. Kelly's since retired, and just continued on that program.
So that was back in 1997.
Right.
What was the crucial role that you think led to the growth of Caplink and your expansion? Was it that eye out of the Canadian market of saying we need to be a North American company?
We needed a safer market. I just felt that I'm an advocate of markets where I look for issues that could lead to economic recessions and collapse. And I felt that Alberta and Canada was en route for a repeat of 2008, around 2019. And the only reason we didn't hit that wall was because COVID came in early 2020. There was all the stimulus money, and the economies were buoyed artificially for a period of time. We're now starting to run into those headwinds in areas of Canada and the United States. So I'm very happy to say that we now can lend Canada. We can pick our markets. Before we were Alberta-centric, now we're North America-centric. So we cherry pick where we want to lend, who we want to lend to. Like, you should see the properties we're lending on in Mexico, right? I mean, I've got one deal we're closing soon here. It's 1.1 million. We're lending 550,000. Property's 1 year old. Is stunning, and it's a rental property, so it makes great revenue. I don't have those opportunities in Canada anymore. There's too much competition for those.
And what about in the U.S.?
U.S., similar opportunities, except we're seeing a significant decline in markets like Arizona, Texas, and Florida. So when we entered the U.S., what we were following was the Canadian snowbird. So we're the first and only company to ever be granted U.S. mortgage banking licenses who's not resident in the United States. So I'm licensed in Arizona, Colorado, California, Washington, Texas, and Florida, and can lend in 35 states. But we follow the Canadian investor around. Those Arizona, Florida, Texas, California, they're generally called the sand states, and they really go up in value during the good times and then really go down in the bad times. And right now, Florida's taking a hit. So I'm actually not doing much lending in the US and probably won't for 12 months till it bottoms out.
Okay.
So we get to navigate that because we have that dexterity. I mean, I know one of your, we'll probably talk about some regulation, but personally, I have 34 licenses and I have 17 regulators in 3 countries.
That's was actually my next question, because to navigate these complex markets and these regulatory environments, what are some key lessons you've learned?
Patience. Patience. That's not my virtue. And you ask my wife, I'm an impatient man. But we started heading into the US. Well, COVID slowed things down, but our first major license in the US was California, and that took us 16 months, right? Florida took 14, Arizona was 12. So where I thought I could sign up and get a license, it was amazingly slow and cumbersome, very expensive. And from an insurance and licensing fee perspective. Mexico, not so much, but Mexico, though it has a very limited regulatory regime, so it's much easier for us to navigate that. They have a complex legal system. So as a lender, any lender would want to, first question is, if I have a default, how do I foreclose? How do I recover the asset? Those answers come easy in Canada and the United States. Mexico was more of a challenge, but we developed a process for securing and realizing on bad loans there that is actually now superior to anything we can enjoy in Canada or the United States.
Would you consider Mexico a stable place to invest?
Yes, better. Mexico, I'm 62. You get to that age and you kind of go, if I could take what I know now and go back 20 years, what would I do, right? Well, when I have a human geography economics background, so population demographics, that's something I enjoy studying. Mexico today is where Canada and the United States were 50 years ago. So if you ever had that thought in your head, if I could do it again, what would I do? I'd say, go to Mexico and you'll see it.
So as people are listening and watching this podcast, they're all on their phone right now. How do I get a hold of Caplink?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the other arm of the business, though. You recently launched SoBankable.
Right.
What is that?
That's our international lending brand name. The name Caplink, if you go into the United States, everything's named capital this, capital that. I couldn't even trademark the name Caplink because somebody had a derivative of that. So we needed a new name that we could use, and we came up with SoBankable. And the reference to SoBankable is, of course, to suggest that anybody can be financed, right, if you have real estate. So we find, especially with bankers, they like the name. And we were able to trademark it in Canada, the US, Mexico, and elsewhere. So the platform, the backbone of it is finance, but we're just adding on consumable products to the platform, such as travel insurance, homeowners insurance, foreign credit cards, bank accounts. We've been approved by the IRS in the United States to process what are called ITINs, which are individual tax identification numbers, if you want to invest and you need a tax number in the United States. So we're layering in a number of consumable products that we hope to be able to sell this very, a very good client base that we get. I mean, the people that we're lending to, you got to remember, my whole background is as a subprime lender, right? So the individuals I typically deal with have bad credit because of some reason. And it's always somebody else's fault, not theirs.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, it's the ex that caused the problem. But the point is, the people we're lending to now, they have excellent credit, great jobs, they have good net worths. They're everything a bank would want to lend to. Their only problem is they want to borrow in a country where they're not a resident. And we plug that hole. So that's why in Mexico, we're virtually alone in what we do, especially since we're the only lender that lends in the United States and Mexico in Canadian currency.
Oh, so it's in Canadian currency? That's even better.
Yeah. So when you borrow from me in Mexico, I mean, we'll convert it to pesos or US dollars or whatever you need to close. But I had no interest in having exchange rate risk in my fund. So we lend in Canadian dollars. Canadians like it. All our loans are as if we made them in Canada. We're just taking security in another country. But our monthly payments come out of the major banks in Canada. We actually don't have a bank account in Mexico because all our lending is done with Canadians and Americans. So we just collect mortgage payments from them. We have no arrears from any of them. And from a lending perspective, it's pretty exciting.
That would be really exciting. So let's say somebody's, okay, I want to invest in Mexico. They call SoBankable. Do you have, so you have the real estate, you have investors, you have brokers, you got the mortgages, and are you a one-stop shop, I guess would be the question.
Well, we could be. We are being asked repeatedly to assist Mexican developers with marketing their product. And we've just entered into an agreement with a group of investors out of Mexico to develop that market. And that would be on the platform, the SoBankable platform. But presently, we're really busy just being a lender, right? And so where we see ourselves developing on the lending side is continuing to lend to foreigners who want to own in Mexico and the United States. Ultimately, Belize and Costa Rica as well really have a soft spot for Belize. And then, but also Caplink itself is, we're a registered securities dealer in Alberta and British Columbia. So we are an investment fund manager. So we raise capital with investors in Canada and deploy it in projects, either by way of mortgage or direct investment in real estate transactions in the United States and Mexico.
And I think with those, they're pretty unwieldy. Like you're saying right now, you're going to just let the U.S. percolate and Canada for the next year or so. Yeah. So as you're looking, you also don't want to expand too much, right? Then it becomes...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. That's why we've spent a lot of our time focusing on Mexico. See, Mexico, again, we've developed a regime around how we can realize on a defaulted loan, which any lender has to concern themselves with. But also, not only do we get a better borrower, but in Mexico, it's easy to limit your loan to value, which is the amount of loan against the value of the property, to like our max is 70%. I've never lost money on a 70% loan to value. Where you get in trouble is where you end up in loans that are 85% or higher. And in Canada, we were finding that because there's an abundance of private money looking for loans, we were getting forced to go up to that 85% loan to value, which we don't like. So we were able to temper that by lending again in the United States and Mexico, where we just tell people, depending on the market, we won't go over 70, but typically are 65.
Okay.
So from a lending, I've been doing this for 27 years. We've got the lowest number of defaults, and a default is just a late payment. But we've got the lowest number of defaults currently that we've ever had in 27 years, as an actual number and a percentage of the fund.
Why do you think that is?
Because we get better borrowers.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're getting,
yeah. I've got a much better clientele, and I mean, I've made a career off people that had problems, but I'm really enjoying the new group that we're lending to, right?
It's exciting, actually, because then you probably see something even bigger future for the business.
Well, for sure. And also we did our first loan in Mexico, funded the loan in August of last year. So we're just coming up on 1 year. That first property we did, I would speculate right now that it's probably worth 15 to 20% more than when we lent on it. So again, what's happening is land and properties are appreciating so quickly in some parts of Mexico that our risk gets lower and lower every year because of the fact that there's more equity in the property.
What's the hottest parts in Mexico right now?
Oh, well, there's 31 states in Mexico. We lend in 6. And again, just like in the United States, we're following the Canadian and American snowbird around. So Huatuco, Mexico, which is down towards Guatemala, it's on the Pacific side. It's the real hot one right now. Cabo San Lucas, Puerto Vallarta, Merida, Tulum, Cancun, the typical ones that you hear about. Those are all still, good markets to be in. But I can tell you where I get excited is, for example, Cabo San Lucas right now is getting to a point where you're not buying it. You can't buy anything for $250,000, right? You're in the $750 to $1 million range. You drive up the road 30 minutes to the communities that are there. They're stunning. They're smaller, but they're right on beautiful beaches. And anybody buying in those markets is going to do very well in the next 5 years. So I'm happy to lend into those smaller markets.
Those smaller markets. Yeah. How do you foresee regulations shaping the future of mortgage lending and your real estate investments?
Well, in Canada, the government, the securities regulators came in and required that we become dealers back in 2009, 2010. So there's no higher standard of regulation right now than being a securities dealer. So we've gotten used to that life. So in Canada, I don't see regulation changing much from a mortgage lending perspective. The United States, it will choke you. It's beyond ridiculous. It's detrimental to the consumer because, just to give you an idea, if you make a loan on a person's home in the United States and you fail to give the adequate disclosure, in Canada, if you did that, you could be subject to a $500 fine. In the United States, you can be subject to millions of dollars of fines, minimum $10,000 a day until you rectify the situation. So if you do many loans and you have a defective disclosure system, you could suffer a devastating loss. So a lot of lenders outside the banks will not lend to Mr. and Mrs. homeowner, which is a detriment to the homeowner because they have less selection, they have less options. So you'll find that private lenders like us will stay in a lane, like they'll lend to investors who are buying, and it's not an owner-occupied residence, it's a rental property. There's a lot of capital there. But when the financial crisis occurred in the United States, I think there was an overreaction by the government. Like it was horrible, some of the lending that went on, right? It was vulture, and in the sense that people would come up to the funding day and the lender would say, actually the fee, I was going to charge you 1% fee, today it's 2%, and the interest rate is now 12 instead of 9. And I mean, it was horrible. It was predatory. And so some of the legislation that's come in is absolutely required, and but it's just overshot the mark a little bit, I think. And maybe they'll temper it over time. In Mexico, there isn't any. There is no formal mortgage industry because there's no lenders, really. I mean, there's some banks that lend, like HSBC and other local banks, but they only lend to Mexican nationals, residents of Mexico. There's probably about 4 of us that lend to foreigners. We're the only Canadian one that lends to Canadians and Americans in Canadian currency. So we're not big enough industry for the regulators in Mexico to worry about. It'll come.
It'll come.
Yeah.
I was just about to say.
Especially when they go, hey, we can charge these guys for licenses. Let's go regulate them, which is what happens in Canada and the U.S.
What did you say you took at the U of A? Human geographic.
Well, I ultimately what I have is I have an economics and human geography, which is demography and demographics. That's from the U of A. From San Diego, I have a commerce degree. They call it a BBA, Bachelor of Business Admin. And then I have an MBA from the University of Alberta.
Okay, because I'm sitting here fascinated by the way, and that's with so many entrepreneurs, is the way their mind is working and how you see these types of things. Yeah. And for you, I know, looking into your background, mentorship is something huge.
But
what do you do and why do you do it?
It's pay forward, right? When I started out, a lot of people surprised me at how helpful they were, other entrepreneurs. It's, while I was waiting to come into this interview, I was out talking to a young engineer who can't find a job because he just graduated with a chemical engineering degree, and there's very limited opportunities. So these kids know to phone me, and I'll connect them with anybody I can that can help them. So mentoring doesn't, for those that, the term suggests that you take somebody under your wing and you cater, you train them for an indefinite period of time, which I've done to some extent, but mentoring to me is even helping someone just find a job or find an opportunity. And at my age with my contacts, that's something easy for me to do, but very beneficial for a person just starting out, right? So I'm happy to do it.
And isn't that interesting? When you were starting out in the business, you were probably asking lots of questions, but there would have been nothing like Caplink out there at the time when you were asking all these questions.
Right, but lending was lending. It's been around forever. But mostly, it's encouragement. Mentoring a lot of times comes from people who have nothing to do with your industry, but they understand the stress and loneliness that can come from operating your own business. Because you can't turn to your staff and say, I'm having a bad day, right? Doesn't get them all excited about going to work. So you got to find someone else to cry on their shoulder, right? So you're seeking out other entrepreneurs. And if there's one thing I do tell young people, don't be afraid to approach entrepreneurs, males, females. You'll find, I think, a large percentage of them love sharing and love talking. And no one ever asks them.
True.
Yeah. So I mean, if they just spend some time, young people don't. I've had people show up in my office with an appointment, but just wanted to chat, and they have nothing to do with mortgages. They just wanted to know what it was like to own a business and some of the good and bad that goes with it. Right.
What is the best that you think about owning your own business?
Oh, I'm not a good employee. So,
it's good to know that about yourself.
Yeah, no, it wasn't going to work. My wife conceded to that notion when we got married. She just said I had to go do whatever I do on my own. I like working with people a lot. I don't like working for them. So I was always in that vein. I always had to work on my own.
27 years with Caplink. Is there one thing where you went, oh, that was wish I could have done that better?
Oh, yeah. Oh gosh, talk to any entrepreneur. You're constantly making mistakes, but you make them because you're exploring new opportunities. If you're afraid to fail, then you fail because you don't do anything. So if you're just gonna just sit there and wait for the perfect moment to enter the market, or like I flew head first into the United States. There's no way I could prepare for what I was going into. I could talk to thousands of people and still not know until you live it, right? So you just got to do it, but that leads to mistakes. You just hope those mistakes are lessons that you can take forward, and they don't completely wipe you out.
That would be nice. So you look at the future of SoBankable or Caplink. Is there something that you're really excited about as a future project?
Oh, I feel like I'm starting new. Right, with SoBankable and the opportunities, it's exciting. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm 62, and people ask me when I'm going to retire, and I'm like, I don't think so. All the guys and ladies that I know that have retired early are painfully bored, looking for something to do, and you see them re-enter the business world, maybe not to the same level they were at before, but if you're mentally and physically healthy, why stop? I mean, I like what I do. I watched a couple of your podcasts, and one individual said, you got to be passionate about what you do. And if you are, getting out of bed is an exciting thing. Going to work, thinking about what you do. My family and my wife may question that thinking, but I mean, there's always something new to learn. And if you don't want to keep learning, what else is there, right?
Yeah. And if there's somebody listening that wants their own path in real estate or finance, what parting advice would you give to them to enrich their experience in that world?
Oh, it's like I think the finance side, you need to start, well, both. You need to start working in the industry. So if you were like 20 something years old and starting out on your own, that would be brutal. That could be really hard. It's a very sophisticated finance world now. Even your standard residential mortgage, there's so many layers involved now that you can't just run into that. So you need to work for somebody for a period of time until you get your knowledge and your personal confidence up, and then go out into that marketplace. So I'd give yourself 5 years to get started. Same with real estate. If you got to pick your lane. We mentor at the U of A and we work with students, and I love working with like the Faculty of Economics, where I'm an alumni. And real estate is a huge industry. I mean, there's buying and selling real estate. There's being analysts for life insurance company on there's property managers. And now there's fintech in real estate. There is so much that you can do that you may enter at one point and come out a totally different exit at the end. So start where you can, and then let your path, be kind of guided through wherever you go. And it's not limited to Canada. I've known many people who started in Canada and gone to the US and other countries and done very well. I think of one executive with a REIT that I know. We were speaking to some students at the U of A a few years back, and they asked us all how we got started. And his initial job, I really got a kick out of. He was desperate for work, and he got a job wrapping Christmas gifts at Southgate Shopping Center. And from there, he got to know the property manager, and the property manager hired him, and that started him in a career of real estate, commercial real estate.
Wrapping Christmas.
Wrapping Christmas. Yeah. So I mean, it's you never know where it's going to start.
If somebody wants to get a hold of Brian Menges at Caplink, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on the website, so anytime they can feel free, or on LinkedIn. I get a lot of people reach out to me there, and I'm quite accessible that way.
Super. Thank you. This is so fascinating.
Yeah.
This has been the Early Days, brought to you by our friends at Prowse Chowne. And as today's insightful conversation comes to an end, leaving you with some valuable takeaways if you want to get into this end of the real estate and investing side of things. And see you next time on Early Days. Thanks again, Prowse Chowne. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.